More protests in Ferguson, Missouri today as Attorney General Eric Holder and FBI agents met with witnesses and officials as they investigate the killing of Michael Brown. It's been a week and a half since the unarmed African-American teen was shot by a white police officer, sparking demonstrations and some violence.
And what's happening in Ferguson has brought back memories for many who dedicated themselves to fighting racism.
A little more than 50 years ago, civil rights leader Reverend James M. Lawson Jr. found himself in a protest right here in Nashville. Tonight, he sat down with News Channel 5's Shannon Royster, and he addressed the challenges faced in Ferguson and what needs to be done to make a real difference.
He did, Vicki. He was actually a part of Nashville's lunch counter sit-ins back in 1959, challenging segregation. He says some people think the work ended there, but dismantling what he calls a racist, violent system is the task of every generation.
It's been more than a week now, and protests in the streets of Ferguson continue.
This time, black community is trying to wake up.
It's all in response to the shooting death of unarmed 18-year-old Michael Brown by a white police officer.
Started calling what happened in Ferguson lynching or continuation of lynching by the police.
And civil rights leader Reverend James M. Lawson Jr. says it stems from the violence of racism, something he knows all too well after leading peaceful lunch counter sit-ins in downtown Nashville in the 50s and 60s.
The movement of which I was a part with Dr. King and Rosa Parks and many others did not go on long enough to get at the issue of violence and racism.
But Reverend Lawson says the people of Ferguson are going about it in the wrong way.
They will exhaust themselves.
He says they need to come up with a plan they can sustain and not place blame.
Seek to understand it enough to map out a short-term, long-term program for it to be eradicated. You don't eradicate this kind of structural violence of 300 or 400 years overnight, and especially you don't eradicate it when so many people see it as justified.
Which Lawson believes will take more than the people in Ferguson to make a difference.
The business of unwrapping our humanity and getting the dominant forces in our society to acknowledge our common humanity is the task of every generation. And the task has never been finished in the United States. It's a mistake for so many people to think that it has.
Now, I also asked Reverend Lawson about the violence and looting in Ferguson. He tells me they're angry, so they're lashing out. And unlike the sit-ins, they have no leader, no structure, and no plan.
All right. Thanks, Shannon. Reverend Lawson returned to Nashville this week to educate activists on the dynamics of nonviolent action for the second annual James Lawson Institute at Vanderbilt. It's an initiative he formed 2 years ago due to the lack of progress made since the civil rights movement.